Hello to all of our HAEA friends out there. This is Tony, and welcome to this HAEA Webinar Brief. Today, we're actually going to speak to an HAE patient who has recovered from the COVID-19 coronavirus. Now, before we get started, I'd like to just make a few points that are very important. This webinar brief is intended to inform the HAE community about issues of interest related to the COVID-19 pandemic. Therefore, we want to make it clear that no definitive medical conclusions can be drawn from the case of COVID-19 coronavirus that you'll hear about during today's webinar brief. Nothing presented in this webinar is being offered as medical advice and cannot and should not be used to draw any conclusions about the severity or duration of a COVID-19 coronavirus infection. Science shows that there are a multiplicity of factors that may affect the medical impact of a COVID-19 coronavirus infection in a human being. We care deeply about the HAEA community, so we would like to kindly remind everyone watching this webinar to exercise an abundance of caution and contact their doctor immediately at the onset of feeling sick. Finally, we recommend that every HAE friend watching today continue following the guidelines put forth by your local and state governments and the Federal Centers for Disease Control. Well, today we have a special guest with us who I think is quite well known to the HAEA community because he was a founding board member of the Hereditary Angioedema Association. So I'd like to welcome Mr. Scott McCoy. Welcome, Scott.
Thank you very much, Mr. Castaldo. It's wonderful to be with you today. I'm looking forward to answering all your questions and helping everybody out.
Yeah, we're really glad to have you here today, Scott. So why don't we start out by having you tell us a little bit about yourself and your history with HAE.
Sure. I am 63 years old now. HAE has been in my family for now is 6 generations. My father passed away when I was 10 years old from an airway attack. I have since passed it on to my daughter, Taylor, who has passed it on to my grandson, Mason. So we have 6 generations, and we just can't get that gene to stop reproducing the wrong way. So, but I had my first attack when I was 18, and then I went a few years without any attacks, and then they started to get more and more severe as I was getting older in life. And then I went through the period of using the steroids to prevent the attacks, and went through numerous clinical trials to get some medication approved for all of us to use. So, like I said, the HAE all my life. I'm basically one of the lucky ones that I knew I had a family history of HAE. So I knew as soon as my left hand swelled up one day that I had what my father had. So I wasn't one of those people that is looking for a diagnosis. I knew exactly at that point what I had, which was hereditary angioedema.
Well, Scott, frankly, the good news is, for both you and your grandchildren, you started something many years ago and were a big part of the movement that's really resulted in the therapies that we now have today. And I know it's our hope for all of us that none of our children and grandchildren have to suffer and go on therapies that really aren't specifically targeted for hereditary angioedema. We always talk about having 7 products approved in 10 years, and you were certainly a big part of that with your efforts in being part of the Hereditary Angioedema Association. So let's move on to really the issue here today, and we did say that you unfortunately did contract the COVID-19 coronavirus. How do you think you got it, Scott?
Well, I know how I got mine, and that is from my wife, Vicky. So she was the first to get infected. However, I might stress that we did conformed to all guidelines set forth. We didn't go anywhere. Even my two daughters were not coming to the house. The only places that Vicki and I were going to were the grocery store. So obviously, she must have picked it up at the grocery store. And then she started showing symptoms first, and then I followed. So I'll go over some of my symptoms and some of her symptoms. We were basically pretty much, we had a lot of the same symptoms, but a lot of different ones. So let me go through the symptoms. We both had intestinal cramping, diarrhea, chills, body aches. And the one strange thing that happened to both of us was that she had a rash from the top of her head to the bottom of her toes, a very itchy rash. I got the rash around my neck and my shoulder area. And then the most prevalent symptom that I had personally, she did not get this, but I had the loss of taste and smell for at least 10 days, where I could not taste or smell anything, which is a very strange experience. So I first noticed that when I had a little indigestion, went over and chewed up 4 Gaviscon tablets and went, wait a second, I didn't even taste those Gaviscon tablets. So that's the first I noticed it. And then I followed it, and I realized that, I just couldn't smell or taste anything in the house. So those are the basic symptoms that we both went through. Very hard getting tested, as when you tell them you do not have a cough, you do not have a fever, you don't have any of the classic symptoms that they're looking for, but you press and press, and finally they'll test you. Being that I had 2 daughters in the medical field, and that they had a little concern about that, I think we both found it a little easier to get tested. So Vicki went first. She started showing symptoms first, and I followed. The symptoms lasted probably, I'm going to say, a good 10 to 14 days for both of us. At the time, we didn't know about the rash thing. We just found it odd that we got the rash, but after, of course, they keep finding more and more symptoms that COVID-19 patients have, and we found out that yes, a rash is part of it. So that's our symptoms. Runny nose also, body aches, chills, very, very, very fatigued. I slept one day for 18 hours straight. So that was a big part of it too. So we went through about 7 days of that, of body aches and everything. And then I finished out with I just couldn't taste or smell for about another 7 days after those main symptoms went away. But we're both back, we're both recovered, and we're both healthy. And it's been probably 3 weeks to a month now that we have been clear of all symptoms. So we're very happy to have made it through it.
Wow, very interesting, Scott, that you didn't get any of the respiratory symptoms that many people seem to get when they contract the COVID-19 coronavirus. So really, Scott, the fundamental question that all of us really want to ask, and then perhaps you've kind of answered already, but I think it'd be great for you to address this directly. Did you have any HA flares or HA symptoms during the time that you were suffering from the COVID-19 symptoms?
I had absolutely no HAE symptoms or issues or problems at all. I will just say that I am on subcutaneous C1 prophylactically. So that is, that's just a normal process for me weekly. But as in having any issues when I had the virus, Tony, I had absolutely no issues at all, no swells, no problems, nothing. HAE did not rear its ugly head during that time I had the virus.
Yeah, and that's really consistent, Scott, with what the doctors have told us when they've addressed the issue of an HAE patient, and the coronavirus pandemic. And one of the things they've always recommended is to make sure you keep your prescriptions current and you're taking your medicines on schedule. So it's good to hear that you've done that. Well, Scott, this has been really interesting. Thank you so much for sharing your story of the COVID-19 coronavirus appearance in your family. We're very happy that you're doing well and that you're healthy. Thank goodness for that. And again, thank you for sharing the time with us today.
Okay. I want to take the time to thank you, Tony, for having me involved with this. Important to get the word out to people, but I really appreciate the opportunity to have spoken with you today. I appreciate it.
That's great, Scott. And before we sign off, let me remind our HAA friends that nothing presented in today's webinar is being offered as medical advice and should not be used to draw any conclusions about the severity or duration of a COVID-19 coronavirus infection. I wish all of our HAA friends good health and stay safe.